I found the door 3 weeks after moving into my grandmother's old house. Let me back up. My grandmother died last October, and she left me her house in rural Vermont. I was her only grandchild, and we'd been close when I was younger, though I hadn't visited much in the last few years. College, then my first job, then life just got in the way. I felt guilty about that when she passed. The house was old, built in 1903, and she'd lived there alone for the last 15 years, ever since my grandfather died. It was a 2-story colonial with a big wraparound porch sitting on 5 acres of land surrounded by woods. Beautiful, but isolated. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road. I'm 24, single, and my lease in Boston was ending anyway, so I decided to move in. My job was remote, and honestly, the idea of living rent-free while I figured out my life sounded pretty good. Plus, I could take my time going through her things, fixing the place up, and deciding whether to sell it or keep it. The first 2 weeks were normal. I unpacked, set up my workspace in the spare bedroom, and started sorting through decades of accumulated belongings. My grandmother had been a bit of a pack rat. The attic was full of boxes, the closets were stuffed, and the basement, well, the basement was a disaster. It was unfinished, with a concrete floor, stone walls, and exposed beams across the ceiling. There was an old oil furnace in one corner, some metal shelving units covered in dust, and piles of boxes and old furniture everywhere. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, and there were a couple of small windows near the top of the walls that let in almost no light. I'd been avoiding it, but finally decided to tackle it on a Saturday morning. I put on old jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed some trash bags and a flashlight, and headed down. The stairs creaked under my feet. The air smelled like damp earth and mildew. I pulled the string on the light bulb, and it flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across everything. I started with the boxes closest to the stairs. Most of them contained old clothes, moth-eaten blankets, and stacks of yellowed newspapers from the 1980s. I filled 3 trash bags in the first hour. As I worked my way deeper into the basement, I had to move some old furniture to get to the boxes behind it. A broken desk, a couple of chairs, a warped bookshelf. That's when I saw it. Behind the bookshelf, set low in the stone wall, was a small metal door. It was maybe 2 feet square, painted the same gray as the wall, but obviously much newer. There was a heavy bolt lock on the outside, currently unlocked. I'd never seen it mentioned in any of the house documents, and it definitely wasn't on the original floor plans I'd looked at. I knelt down and examined it. The metal was cold under my fingers, and there were scratches around the edges like it had been pried at or clawed at. I reached for the handle, then stopped. I could hear something. At first, I thought it was the furnace or pipes in the walls, but no, this was coming from behind the door. It was faint, rhythmic, like breathing. Slow, steady breaths. My heart started pounding. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid even as I said it. The breathing stopped. I waited frozen in place, my hand still hovering over the door handle. 30 seconds passed. A minute? Nothing. "You're being ridiculous," I muttered to myself. It was probably just air moving through the foundation or some weird acoustic effect. Old houses make strange noises. I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door didn't budge. I pulled harder, and this time it creaked open a few inches. A blast of cold air hit my face, much colder than the basement, and it smelled wrong, like wet stone and something else, something organic and rotten. I shined my flashlight into the gap. Beyond the door was darkness. The flashlight beam didn't seem to penetrate very far, but I could make out what looked like a narrow passageway or a very small room. The walls were rough stone, different from the basement's foundation. And then I heard it again. The breathing. Louder now, echoing slightly in the confined space. I slammed the door shut and scrambled backwards so fast I knocked over a box. My flashlight clattered to the floor. For a long moment, I just sat there on the cold concrete, my breath coming in short gasps, staring at that door. This was insane. There couldn't be something alive down there. The space behind that door was part of the foundation. There was no room for anything larger than a crawl space. But I heard it. That breathing, slow and deliberate and definitely not my imagination. I grabbed my flashlight and got up, my legs shaky. I needed to call someone. But who? The police? And tell them what? That I heard breathing behind a door in my basement? They'd think I was crazy. I went back upstairs, locked the basement door behind me, and spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself with work. But I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about that door, that cold air, that breathing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak. Every sound made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps in the basement. Not the settling of old wood, not pipes expanding. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate, walking across the concrete floor. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. The footsteps continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Then they started again, pacing back and forth. I grabbed my phone and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house, in the basement. I can hear them walking around. The dispatcher asked for my address, asked if I was safe, asked if I could get out of the house. I told her I was upstairs, the intruder was below, and yes, I could leave if I needed to. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Can you still hear the intruder? I listened. The footsteps had stopped. No, not anymore. Okay, the officers should be there in about 10 minutes. Do not go downstairs. Stay where you are. I waited by the window in my bedroom, watching for the police car. When I saw the lights coming up the driveway, I went downstairs and met them at the front door. There were 2 officers, a middle-aged man with a gray mustache and a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. I explained that I'd heard footsteps in the basement. They asked me to wait in the living room while they checked. I sat on the couch, listening to them move through the house. I heard them open the basement door, heard their footsteps on the stairs, heard their muffled voices. After about 10 minutes, they came back up. "Ma'am, there is no one down there," the male officer said. "We checked everywhere, including behind the furnace and all the storage areas. All the windows are locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry anywhere in the house." "But I heard footsteps," I insisted. "Someone was walking around down there." The female officer exchanged a glance with her partner. "Old houses make a lot of noise, especially at night when everything's quiet. Pipes, heating systems, the foundation settling. It can sound like footsteps. This wasn't pipes. This was someone walking." "Is there anyone who might have a key to the house? A relative, a friend?" "No, I changed the locks when I moved in." They asked me a few more questions, checked my doors and windows again, and finally left, probably thinking I was just a paranoid city girl not used to living alone in an old house. But I knew what I'd heard. The next morning, I went back down to the basement. In the daylight, or what passed for daylight in that dim space, everything looked ordinary. I made my way to the small metal door and examined it again. The bolt lock was still open. I hadn't touched it yesterday. I hadn't thought to lock it after I slammed the door. I reached out and slid the bolt into place. It made a solid, heavy sound. Whatever was behind that door, if anything, was now locked in. I felt a little better after that. Not much, but a little. I tried to go about my day normally. I worked, made lunch, went for a walk in the afternoon. But as evening approached, I started to feel anxious. I kept finding excuses to walk past the basement door, making sure it was still closed and locked. Around 8 p.m., my phone rang. It was my mom. "Hey, sweetie, just checking in. How's the house?" I almost told her everything about the door, the breathing, the footsteps, but I stopped myself. My mom had been worried about me living alone in that big house from the beginning. If I told her about this, she'd insist I leave immediately. "It's fine," I said. "A lot of work to do, but I'm making progress." We chatted for a while about family stuff, and by the time we hung up, I felt a bit better, more grounded. Maybe the cops were right. Maybe I was just letting my imagination run wild. I went to bed around 11 p.m., determined to get a good night's sleep. I woke to the sound of metal scraping against metal. I sat up in the darkness, my heart already racing. The sound came again, a harsh, grinding screech that seemed to come from below, from the basement. The bolt. Something was trying to open the bolt on that door. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I turned on the flashlight and crept out of my bedroom. The house was silent, except for that terrible scraping sound. I made my way to the top of the basement stairs and opened the door. The light was off down there, but I could see a faint glow, maybe from the small windows, and I could hear the scraping more clearly now. Metal on metal, insistent and rhythmic. "Stop it!" I shouted into the darkness. "Whatever you are, stop it!" The scraping stopped immediately. I stood there, breathing hard, my phone gripped in my hand. Seconds ticked by. Nothing. Then I heard it. A voice. Thin and raspy, barely more than a whisper, but definitely a voice. "Let me out." My blood turned to ice. "Let me out," it said again, more insistent this time. "Please, let me out." It sounded almost human. Almost, but there was something wrong with it, something that made my skin crawl. The words were shaped correctly, but the voice behind them was like nothing I'd ever heard. "Who are you?" I called down, though every instinct screamed at me to run. "Let me out. So hungry. Please." "How did you get in there? What are you?" "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." The voice rose in pitch and volume, becoming a horrible chant. I slammed the basement door and locked it, then shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. The chanting continued, muffled now, but still audible. "Let me out, let me out, let me out." I ran to my bedroom, grabbed my laptop, and searched frantically for information about the house. I found property records, historical documents, even some old newspaper articles about the neighborhood. Nothing mentioned a room under the basement. Nothing explained what that door was for. The chanting finally stopped around 4 a.m. I hadn't slept. I just sat on my bed with all the lights on, clutching my phone, ready to call 911 again if needed. When dawn broke, I made a decision. I needed to know what was behind that door. I couldn't keep living like this, too terrified to sleep, jumping at every sound. I had to either prove I was crazy and there was nothing there, or find out what the hell was going on. I waited until full daylight, then armed myself with a hammer, my phone with 911 pre-dialed, and a large flashlight. I opened the basement door slowly. Everything was silent. I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The metal door was still bolted shut. I approached it slowly, hammer raised, and listened. Nothing. I knelt down and examined the bolt. There were fresh scratches on it, deep gouges in the metal that definitely hadn't been there before. Something had been trying to force it open from the other side. My hand shook as I reached for the bolt. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to leave the house, to never come back. But I had to know. I slid the bolt open. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the door began to swing inward, pushed from the other side. A hand emerged first, a human hand, pale and thin with dirty, broken fingernails. It gripped the edge of the door frame, and then I saw the arm, skin stretched tight over bone, covered in filth. I scrambled backward, a scream caught in my throat. A face appeared in the doorway. It was human, mostly. Gaunt, with sunken eyes and cracked lips. But there was something wrong about the proportions, the way the jaw hung, the angle of the skull. It looked at me with those hollow eyes, and when it spoke, its voice was the same raspy whisper I'd heard in the night. "Thank you. So hungry. Thank you." It began to crawl out of the doorway, moving with a horrible, insect-like motion. I finally found my voice and screamed, swinging the hammer. I didn't even aim. I just wanted it away from me. The hammer connected with something, and the thing let out a shriek that didn't sound human at all. It recoiled back through the doorway, and I lunged forward and slammed the door shut, fumbling with the bolt. The thing threw itself against the door from the other side. The metal boomed and buckled, but the bolt held. I could hear it on the other side, making sounds that alternated between human words and something else, something wet and animal. I ran upstairs, not stopping until I was in my car with the doors locked. I drove to the nearest town and sat in a coffee shop, shaking, until I could think clearly enough to make a plan. I called a contractor that afternoon, told him I needed the basement door bricked over immediately, that there was a structural issue that needed to be sealed over. He gave me a weird look, but agreed to do it the next day for extra money. I also called a locksmith and had him meet me at the house. With him there, a big guy who looked like he could handle himself, I felt safe enough to go back inside. I had him change every lock and install deadbolts on all the doors, including the basement door. The contractor came the next day with his crew. I stayed upstairs while they worked, but I could hear them talking in confused voices. When they finished, the foreman came up to talk to me. "Ma'am, we bricked over that door in the basement like you asked, but you know there's a whole room back there, right? Like a pretty big space. You sure you want it sealed off?" "I'm sure." "Okay, but we heard some weird noises while we were working. Sounded like something moving around back there." "Probably just rats," I said, my voice flat. He looked like he wanted to say more, but just nodded and left. I sold the house 2 weeks later. Took a loss on it. Priced it below market value just to get it off my hands quickly. I never told the buyers about the room below, about the door, about what was behind it. I probably should have, but I also didn't want to be responsible for someone opening that door again. Sometimes I think about what my grandmother knew. Why was that door there? How long had that room existed? Did she know what was locked inside? Or had she sealed it away herself years ago, hoping no one would ever find it? I tried to research the house's history more thoroughly after I moved out. I found something interesting and terrifying. The house was built in 1903, but there was a structure on that land before. A root cellar, maybe, or a small foundation from an earlier building. The records were unclear. But I also found an old newspaper article from 1897. A local farmer and his family had lived on that property. One winter, they all went missing, just disappeared. The authorities at the time assumed they'd fled their debts, but their belongings were all still in the house. No one ever found out what happened to them. I think I know where they went, or at least where one of them ended up. I live in an apartment in Burlington now. 4th floor, neighbors on all sides, lots of light. I sleep with the lights on most nights, and I will never, ever live in a house with a basement again, because sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, and in that space between dreaming and waking, I swear I can still hear it, that raspy voice, thin and desperate, calling from somewhere far below. Let me out. So hungry. Let me out. And I wonder if that brick wall will hold forever, or if someday someone will break through and find what's waiting on the other side. I hope I'm far away when that happens. I really, really hope. When I graduated college last May, I landed a decent entry-level job at a marketing firm in downtown Philadelphia. The salary was okay, not great, but enough to survive on if I was careful. The problem was finding an affordable place to live. Everything within reasonable distance of my office was way out of my budget, and I was getting desperate. I'd been crashing on my friend Marcus's couch for 3 weeks, and I could tell his patience was wearing thin. That's when I found the listing. It was late on a Thursday night, and I was scrolling through rental websites for what felt like the 100th time when I saw it. Spacious 1BR apartment, historic building, $450 a month, available immediately. The price made me do a double take. Everything else I'd looked at in that neighborhood was at least $1,200, and most were closer to $1,500. I clicked on the listing, half expecting it to be a scam or a typo. The photos showed a surprisingly nice apartment. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, a decent-sized bedroom, and a kitchen that looked recently updated. The building itself was old, probably from the 1920s, with that classic pre-war architecture. The landlord's name was listed as Richard Volkmer, and there was a phone number. I called the next morning during my lunch break. "Volkmer residence?" A gravelly voice answered. "Hi, Mr. Volkmer. My name is David Chen. I'm calling about the apartment listing. The 1 bedroom for $450? There was a pause. "Ah, yes. You're interested." "Definitely. I know it's a great price. Is it still available?" Another pause. "It is. When would you like to see it?" We arranged to meet that evening at 6 p.m. I left work early, took the subway to the address he'd given me, and found myself standing in front of a 6-story brick building on a tree-lined street. It was a nice area, quiet, with a corner coffee shop and a small park nearby. I couldn't believe my luck. Mr. Volkmer was waiting in the lobby. He was probably in his 70s, thin and stooped, with wispy white hair and pale, watery eyes behind thick glasses. He shook my hand with a grip that felt like cold paper. "3rd floor," he said, leading me to the elevator. "Apartment 302. The elevator was one of those old cage-style ones with the metal grate you had to pull shut. It groaned and creaked as we ascended. Mr. Volkmer didn't say much during the ride, just stood there with his hands folded, staring at the floor. When we reached the third floor, he pulled open the gate and led me down a dimly lit hallway. The carpet was worn but clean, and the walls were painted a faded green. He stopped at a door marked 302 and fumbled with a large ring of keys. "Here we are," he said, pushing the door open. The apartment was even better than the photos suggested. The living room was spacious, with 2 large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The bedroom was a decent size, and the bathroom had been recently renovated. But it was the kitchen that really caught my attention. It was narrow, almost galley style, with white cabinets and black countertops. At the far end was a window that looked out onto the building next door. Everything was clean and modern. I couldn't find a single thing wrong with the place. "This is amazing," I said, walking around. "But I have to ask, why is it so cheap?" Mr. Volkmer was standing in the doorway, not coming inside. He said, "I prefer to keep my rents affordable. I've owned this building for 40 years. I'm not trying to get rich." It seemed like a reasonable answer, even if it was a bit too good to be true. When could I move in? "Immediately. I just need first month rent and a security deposit. No credit check necessary." I should have been more suspicious. Looking back, all the signs were there. But I was desperate and broke, and the apartment was perfect. I agreed on the spot, wrote him a check, and got the keys that same evening. I moved in 2 days later on a Sunday. Marcus helped me haul my stuff up in the creaky elevator. I didn't have much, just some clothes, a desk, a mattress, and a few boxes of books and kitchen supplies. By evening, I was settled in, eating takeout Chinese food on my new second-hand couch and feeling pretty good about life. The first night was quiet. I slept well, exhausted from moving. The second night was the same. On the third night, a Tuesday, things started to feel off. I was in bed around 11 p.m., almost asleep, when I heard a sound from the kitchen. It was faint, like fabric brushing against something. I lay there listening, telling myself it was just the building settling or a neighbor moving around. Old buildings make noise. That's normal. The sound came again, followed by what sounded like a soft exhalation. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to pound. My bedroom door was open, and I could see across the living room into the kitchen. The light was off, but there was enough ambient glow from the streetlights outside to see the basic shapes of the appliances and cabinets. Nothing looked out of place. I got up, flicked on the light switch in the living room, and walked to the kitchen. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The dishes were in the drawing rack, the trash can was closed, and the window at the far end was shut and locked. I'd checked it twice to make sure. "You're being paranoid," I muttered to myself and went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about that sound, that soft brush of fabric, that quiet breath. It sounded like it had come from inside the apartment, not from a neighboring unit. Finally, around 1 a.m., I drifted off. The next day at work, I was exhausted. I grabbed 3 cups of coffee before noon and nearly fell asleep during a client meeting. Marcus noticed. "You look like hell," he said when we grabbed lunch together. "Didn't sleep great," I admitted. Thought I heard something in the apartment last night. Probably just building noise. Those old places are full of weird sounds. Yeah, that's what I figured. But that night, it happened again. I was lying in bed, reading a book on my phone, when I heard it, that same soft brushing sound coming from the kitchen. This time I heard something else too, a faint, rhythmic creaking, like weight shifting from foot to foot. My blood went cold. I put down my phone and stared toward the kitchen. The light was off, and the doorway was just a dark rectangle. I couldn't see inside from my position in bed. The creaking continued. Slow, patient, deliberate. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my hand shaking. Slowly, I got out of bed and crept across the living room. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. As I approached the kitchen, I raised the flashlight. The beam swept across the white cabinets, the black countertops, the sink, the stove. Everything was empty, normal. The window at the far end was closed. But I could swear the air felt different, colder. And there was a smell I hadn't noticed before, something faint and unpleasant, like old meat left too long in the fridge. I stood there for a full minute, shining the light around, but there was nothing. Finally, I turned on the overhead light and checked every corner, every cabinet, even the pantry. Nothing. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day I called Mr. Volkmer. Hi, this is David Chen in 302. I was wondering, have any of the previous tenants mentioned anything unusual about the apartment? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Unusual how? I don't know. Strange noises, maybe? Particularly in the kitchen? Another long pause, this time longer. No, he said finally. Nothing like that. How long has the apartment been vacant? A few months. The last tenant moved out in March. Can I ask why they left? That's not really my business to share, Mr. Volkmer said, his voice stiffening. Is there a problem with the apartment, Mr. Chen? A maintenance issue. No problem. Just curious. Well, if there is nothing else, I have other matters to attend to. He hung up before I could say anything else. I spent that evening doing research. I searched for the building's address online, looking for any history or news articles. I found a few old property records and some listings from previous years, but nothing unusual. No deaths, no crimes, no reported problems. Still, something felt wrong. The way Mr. Volkmer had paused when I asked about previous tenants, the way he'd shut down the conversation so quickly. That night, I decided to stay awake and see what happened. I made a pot of coffee, settled on the couch with my laptop, and kept the lights on. If something was making noise in the kitchen, I was going to catch it. The hours dragged by. Midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m. Then 2 a.m. I was starting to think I'd imagined everything. That exhaustion and stress had made me paranoid. Then, at 2:47 a.m., I heard it again. The soft brushing sound, the quiet exhalation. And this time something new, a wet, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floor. I froze, staring at the kitchen doorway. All the lights in the apartment were on. I could see clearly into the kitchen from where I sat. It was empty, but the sounds continued. Brush, exhale, drag. Brush, exhale, drag. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was a shadow, just a trick of the light. But shadows don't move like that. Shadows don't have weight. There was something in the kitchen doorway. It was tall, impossibly tall, hunched forward at an unnatural angle. The shape was wrong, too thin, with limbs that bent in places they shouldn't. I couldn't make out details, couldn't see a face or features, but I could see the outline, and that was enough. My entire body went cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The thing stood there, swaying slightly, and even though I couldn't see its eyes, I knew it was looking at me. Then it spoke. "You're still here." The voice was wrong. It sounded like paper tearing, like dry leaves scraping against concrete. It came from the direction of the thing, but it felt like it was inside my head. I finally found my voice. "What are you?" The shape tilted its head, or at least something at the top of it tilted. "I've been here longer than you. Longer than anyone." My mind was racing. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare, some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. "The others left. They all left. But you're still here." The previous tenants, they saw me in the kitchen, looking out, and they left. My mouth was dry, looking out from where? The thing moved then, and I wanted to scream. It stepped backwards, deeper into the kitchen, its movements jerky and wrong. It was retreating toward the window at the far end. "From here. I look from here into your world, and I've been doing it for so long." I finally managed to stand up, my legs shaking. "What do you want?" "Nothing. I just watch. And wait." Wait for what? But it was already fading, melting back into the shadows by the window. The last thing I heard was that wet, dragging sound, and then silence. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and my wallet, and I ran. I didn't even take the elevator. I took the stairs 2 at a time, burst out of the building, and kept running until I reached Marcus's apartment 6 blocks away. I pounded on his door until he answered, groggy and confused. "Dave, what the hell?" "I can't go back there," I gasped. "I can't. There's something in that apartment. Something in the kitchen." Marcus let me crash on his couch again. The next morning, I called Mr. Volkmer and told him I was moving out. He didn't seem surprised. "I'll return your security deposit," he said quietly. "You can leave the keys in the mailbox." How many tenants have left? How many have seen it? There was a long silence. "Every single one," he finally said. "Since 1987, no one stays past the first week. Usually they're gone by the 3rd night. Why do you keep renting it?" "Because I have to. The building code requires all units to be available for rent. And besides, what would you have me do? Tell people there's something in apartment 302? That there's a thing that stands in the kitchen and watches? No one would believe me. What is it? I don't know. But it's been there since before I owned the building. The previous owner told me about it when I bought the place. Said it's been there since the building was constructed in 1924. He didn't know what it was either. Just that it watches. I moved my stuff out that weekend with Marcus and 2 other friends helping. None of them would go into the kitchen, not after I told them what happened. They said the whole apartment felt wrong, especially that narrow kitchen with the window at the end. Mr. Volkmer relisted the apartment the following week. I saw it online. Spacious 1BR apartment, historic building, $450 a month, available immediately. Some desperate college kid or broke 20-something will see that listing and think they've hit the jackpot. They'll move in, settle in, feel lucky for a day or two. And then, on the 3rd night, they'll hear that soft brushing sound, that quiet exhalation, and they'll see the thing standing in the kitchen doorway, hunched and wrong, looking out from whatever dark place it comes from, and they'll run, just like I did, just like everyone before me. I still drive past that building sometimes on my way to work. I look up at the 3rd floor, at the windows of apartment 302, and I wonder if anyone's living there now. I wonder if they've made it past the 3rd night. But mostly I wonder what it's still waiting for. And I'm grateful I'll never have to find out.